Notebook on Cities and Culture's Korea Tour is brought to you by Daniel Murphy, David Hayes, and Polar Inertia Journal, an outlet for artists and researchers documenting the urban condition at polarinertia.com. What do you think is the main difference between a Canadian abandoned place and a Korean abandoned place?
That's an interesting question to jump into. Here comes the train. Basically, I haven't done much urban exploring in Canada. I discovered it when I came here. But in Canada and also in America, very often, if you find an abandoned building, it's a sign of major failure. You know, like a building closes because the business, you know, went out of business, went bankrupt or something. Here, you see large tracts of land that are just cordoned off, and people are, told to evict, and then they might find that if they don't evict really, really fast, they get kind of a kick in the ass on the way out. So often, if you see an abandoned neighborhood, and they can get very, very extensive, it is a sign that the area is gentrifying and will become high-rises that are intended for the upper middle class and the upper class to live in very soon. So it's a process of urban renewal, which is very, very powerful in Korea that doesn't exist in Western countries. In my hometown, Edmonton, they just build another neighborhood on the outskirts of town, and the city just keeps expanding. Here, they need to build places that are central, near subway stations, so they just...
They can't just expand.
They can't just expand, right, yeah. So they need to build on existing buildings. And this process has been going on for a long time. A lot of the buildings you see now probably were built on the spot of earlier, probably shanty towns from after the Korean War. So in some places, if you see really nice new buildings, that could be already fourth generation from the Korean War.
Already, it's been taken down and rebuilt that many times.
In some places, I think you could probably say that, yeah. After the Korean War, basically Seoul was almost nearly totally demolished, and there was a very specific process for how it was re-inhabited. Basically, the richest people came in and they got the lowest lying land and everything. They got the downtown areas and everything. And so a lot of the poorer communities, a lot of the poorer people, actually they went up onto the slopes of the mountains. And like, the higher up you went, like, you know, I'm rich, I don't want to live at the top of the mountain. But, so poorer people could move up there. And it developed something that in Korean is called Dongdaemun, which literally means moon village. And as far as I know, the name comes from the fact that, it's closer to the moon. On the hillsides of Korea, if you see a slope, it's probably a slightly poorer neighborhood. There were other places where people would squat, like along Cheonggyecheon and places like that. But yeah, the Dongdaemun are a very interesting vanishing phenomenon because now everybody has cars. So richer people want to live high up. They want to have a great view. So apartment complexes are being built on top of mountains over the place of Dongdaemun.
And it is here in Seoul, Korea. We sit specifically in the neighborhood I just found out. It's called Saboicheondong, in a bar next to somehow pleasantly next to the railroad tracks on Notebook on Cities and Culture. I'm speaking with Jon Dunbar. He is many things. He is the editor of Broken Korea, the longest-running English language zine on the Korean punk zine. He writes the site Daehanmindecline, and he also is an urban explorer. I just got done going on a tour with him around Seoul. What is your definition, John, of urban exploring, urban exploration? What do you call it?
All right, urban exploring, I actually personally dislike the name, and most people do, because first of all, it implies that you're in a city, when a lot of urban exploration is done outside of cities. But my definition has always been it's going to places and inevitably taking pictures of them. Places that are forbidden is the best way I put it. And forbidden can mean a lot of things. In some countries it means illegal. Go there, you get arrested. In other places it means you just shouldn't go there. That's wrong. In Korea, what I consider to be urban exploring can involve going to urban redevelopment zones. It can involve sneaking into construction sites and climbing a construction crane. It can involve going underground, and there are many underground rivers in Korea, such as one that I showed you today. So I'll get a group together because I can't go there alone. And we'll just walk and see what we find on the other end. It can also involve all sorts of other things. It can involve active infiltration of other buildings, rooftopping. Rooftopping is really big in Korea.
Rooftopping?
Yeah. It
Meaning?
means literally going onto the rooftop and taking pictures.
Sure.
So sometimes you'll see, people will take really crazy, dizzying pictures of, like, their legs dangling over a rooftop. Or they'll just go up and take a really nice picture of, historic sites or roads or something, which is more what they do here. It's not too challenging. I have some friends in Hong Kong who do some amazing urban exploring, like rooftop photography. It's a pretty intense thing. I'm afraid of heights, so
No rooftoping for you.
I do plenty, but
No dangling.
some dangling. But I look terrified when I do it.
Sure.
It's a way of confronting my fear, maybe. Yeah.
Now, tell me, are there more forbidden places in Seoul than in other cities, do you think? Is this a forbidden place-rich city?
Actually, I do think that there are a lot more. I'm a member of a website called uer.ca, it stands for Urban Exploration Resource. And I've been there since about 2006.
Canadian site.
It's Canadian-owned, but there are actually more American members than Canadians. It's just the owner is Canadian, and we have people from all over the world. But we have a database there, and most of the contents of the database are for full members only, so you couldn't just go and browse it yourself. But in Seoul, we have, I think, over 150 different cataloged abandonments, and about 40 of those are abandoned neighborhoods that are a very large size, so like several hundred buildings maybe.
How do they get abandoned?
How do they get abandoned? It's the urban renewal process, or in Korean it's called doshi jege발. And so what happens is there's a tract of land that's got some... That's mine. Okay. That's got some slightly older buildings on it, and they want to build something new there for yuppies, upper middle class, upwardly mobile, and rich people, of course. So the process is a very complicated issue that can break down into absolute total urban warfare with people
Literally,
dying.
people dying, protests obviously, but it gets worse.
Yes. So basically, do you want me to walk you through the whole process?
Tell me what's relevant.
Okay, what's relevant? Basically, most people who live in Korea or have businesses don't own the land. So the land can be bought up by corporations who will buy everything, and then they'll evict you. And some people get a pretty good deal out of eviction. So there are actually, if a place is rumored to be, they might announce that it'll be redeveloped. A lot of people will come in and buy land, hoping they'll get a good deal. But some people get a really bad deal, especially poorer people, business owners. And so what happens is, if their compensation isn't good enough, they'll demand more. And what happens next can be very, very political. When I go to abandoned neighborhoods, I see a lot of signs opposing demolition. Sometimes I see protest headquarters. And in Yongsan, where we are right next to, I went and I saw there was a 4-story building called Namildang. When I first went there, there was a fortress built on top where the evictees were, they were staging a sit-in.
In a fortress on top.
Yes, exactly. Just like a little, like tin shack kind of thing. And they were constantly being harassed by a type of hired goon that generally would be called 철거 용역. And these are people that are just like thugs who are given a jacket or something, and they'll come in and they'll smash up your business, and they'll tell you you're getting out of here, So these people were holed up on top of this, and these hired goons were coming and trying to attack them and everything. So
how often do the goons get brought out in these situations?
It really depends. I see a lot of evidence of them. Like sometimes they'll bring sledgehammers in and they'll smash things up and smash holes in walls. They'll often do graffiti. They'll draw like a skull, or they'll draw a severed hand, or a guy being castrated, or somebody being hanged.
Any of the usual icons.
Yeah. One of the weirdest messages that I ever saw actually was in Ahyeon, and it said, "Oma, Appa, musoyo, isa go shipayo." which means like, Mom, Dad, I'm scared, let's move out. And that was obviously done by a gangster, you know? Or not literally a gangster, they're not really organized crime, they're just hired muscle. You know, sometimes they actually have to go through training, but sometimes they'll just get like a day of orientation at most, and then they'll be told,
loose.
Go to this neighborhood. Yeah, let loose.
So when these types of conflicts happen, a place gets abandoned, that's when you come in and you explore? That's the time to go, that's the time to get in there?
Yeah, it can last, there can be a window of like maybe 2 years in some cases, because these are legal battles that do play out legally, and sometimes the evictees do get a win. And sometimes it does get really politicized also. There are many anarchists who do get involved very closely in this. So, yeah, you know, it's not only human rights, but there are people who, like, actively oppose the government through this, which, you know, makes it a bit more urgent for the government to oppose them.
So what types of spaces do you explore in Seoul? What are the main abandoned spaces that you think about when you think about exploring Seoul and these disputed zones?
Yeah. First of all, I've probably been to every type of abandoned building. Like, if you took all the abandoned buildings I went to, magically restored them in, like, a new location, you'd probably have a fully functioning city.
Really? A city of how many people?
Well, that's a good
That
question.
could support how many? Is this like a 1 million people city, or a 500,000, or a 10 million people city?
I bet it could fit a million people with all the abandoned neighborhoods. There might not be enough places of work for them all, though. But yes, like the main thing of Seoul when it comes to urban exploring, I learned very early on. Like, I was sharing pictures on a forum where people go to Kirkbride hospitals in America, if you know what those are.
Maybe you should explain for the listener. They might not all.
Yeah, it was the Kirkbride plan in America, like, I don't know when, established like a lot of mental hospitals that are designed in a certain way, like Danvers and everything. And so Reagan closed almost all of them in the 80s, so they became very beautiful abandonments, and a lot of American urban explorers like really cut their teeth on those. Meanwhile, I'm just photographing like kind of like favela kind of style places in Korea. And so it took me a while to realize, like, I'm photographing something nobody else is. So yeah, that's the unique thing about Korea, is these large tracts of land that are abandoned. But there's so much more also. Like, I snuck into Seoul Station when it was being renovated. It's now a museum. But I got in there and I saw it during that state.
What was in there?
Basically a construction site. But they hadn't removed the tiles from the ceiling yet, so I got an interesting view of what it used to look like.
Korean cinephiles or fans of Korean cinema will be excited to hear that you've been in the Host Tunnel. What's the Host Tunnel?
The Host Tunnel, in the movie The Host, or Kaemur in Korean, there was a monster that lived in a tunnel under one of the bridges along the river, and it brought the daughter of the main characters into its lair there. So they like got weapons and they pursued after it. I basically went on the exact same walk they did. Like, this was filmed on location in this tunnel under one of the bridges. And so in Christmas 2009, Christmas Day, I got a bunch of foreigners together who had no plans that day, and we just went in and walked and saw where it would go. We got in about 1.5 kilometers to where it surfaces. But yeah, it's a giant underground river. A lot of people have heard about G-cans in Japan. It's like a giant underground system for storm drains that you can actually go on tours of.
It's like a holy grail of urban explorers, a system like this.
Yeah, but this one hadn't been. And actually, I discovered it through the artist Kim Miru. Have you ever heard of her?
I think I've heard the name, but who is she?
She did, several years ago, she did a project called Naked City Spleen, where she would go to, like, places mostly around New York. She was a Korean American, and she would photograph herself nude in some pretty extreme places. She did every bridge around Manhattan. She went underground in several places. She actually was naked, alone, photographing herself underground when a homeless guy walked in on her. But yeah, she came to Seoul around 2009. My ex-wife had told me, like, oh yeah, she's naked, you're not allowed to see her.
You're not allowed to see her.
I'm like, she'll wear clothes. But yeah,
in this instance.
So we met up, we traded notes. I told her about some of the abandonments I knew, and she discovered some interesting things. She saw the movie and she said, I want to go there. And so she had a bunch of her dad's helpers basically locate this for us. or for her, and then she went there, got bitten up by mosquitoes while she was naked. And I was like, we're going there on Christmas when it's cold.
Yes, indeed. Now, you mentioned taking a group of foreigners on Christmas into the host tunnel. What does it mean to explore Korea's abandoned, disputed, politicized places as a foreigner?
I actually really dislike attaching race to this.
I don't mean race, I mean nationality.
Oh, no. I want to answer this, actually, yeah. We meet up on holidays, that are family holidays, because foreigners don't usually have families here. So it's easy for us. But I really, really strongly want to have more Korean people interested in this.
Are there a few?
There are very few, yeah. It's very hard to get Korean people interested in this kind of thing.
So when you talk to a Korean friend about what you do, what do they say? Why don't they get excited?
I actually, at my current job, I got really close to one of my coworkers there, and I told him about what I do. And recently, he saw me looking through some of my pictures of Yongsan, and he said, "So, John, when you and your friends meet up, do you ever have anything nice to say about Korea at all?"
He thinks you're just slagging off Korea the whole time.
We're going around being like, "Look, this is embarrassing of Korea." And I was like, "No, we're preservationists, basically."
Look at this dank space.
Yeah, exactly. I was in a car with this guy once. We drove by an abandoned neighborhood, and he was like, "I'm glad they're demolishing that. Look, there was some kind of sleazy businesses there." Right. And I was like, "I know this area. There's so many homes here. People are, where are those people going to go?"
Right. It seems that this is something that I don't know how to put it, but the people that I meet who get exercised about things being demolished in Korea are usually foreigners.
Often, yeah.
Why is that?
I don't want to say we know how to appreciate Korea better than Korean people. I don't actually think that. But I in my case, I've just since it's also strange to me, I've just seen it differently.
Right.
But yeah, there are a lot of foreigners who come here and say in Bukchon Hanok Village and stuff. There are people who say this is what you should be preserving. I strongly feel that it's good that they're trying to preserve the markets here, because they can't compete with a lot of the department stores and online and stuff. So yeah, maybe we see more value in keeping something identifiably Korean, and a lot of Korean people I think want to change what they see as identifiably Korean. They want to see garosugi and department stores. I used to work for the Korean government in an agency that promoted Korea overseas, and they were very clear about this sort of thing.
They knew what they wanted.
Yeah, I would always try to promote Gwangjang Market, or in Ujeongbu there's Bude Jjigae Street where you can go to get this army-based stew is the translation. It was basically originally created by Korean dumpster divers.
Spam.
Yeah. It involves spam and bacon and baked beans. It was originally made by Koreans dumpster diving American bases. Right. And they don't like this sort of thing. They see this as dirty and humiliating. And I personally don't make that connection.
Right. It reminds me of a feeling I've had here a few times, which is that Korea, as it develops, they retain a lot of good things from the sort of developing world, you might say, but seem to be embarrassed about the wrong things in a way. It's no, those things are good, don't worry about those, but there's bad developed world things that also have been embraced here. Does that make sense to you?
Yeah, everybody's very proud of how you get the ancient stuff alongside the modern stuff. So you go downtown, you see a palace with skyscrapers in the background,
It's pretty cool in my mind.
It is. It's very cool. I live right in that area. But also there's kind of the dirtier back streets with skyscrapers in the background, and that's very cool too. If you go to Pimatgor, which mostly doesn't exist anymore, along Insadong, very working class area that's, disappearing all the time. That's something that's disappearing. You mind if I take 1 second? I was going to say something about... What was your question again?
The being embarrassed about the wrong things from the developing world.
Right. Okay, I'll tell you a really good anecdote. Around Dongdaemun one time, I went to a warehouse district. There was all these warehouse buildings being demolished, and I went into one, and several floors up, I ran into a Korean guy who was collecting scrap metal. And he wasn't supposed to be there. I wasn't supposed to be there. So I was like, I'm just here to take pictures. And he was like, he was collecting scrap metal. And he was like, I'm so embarrassed for my country.
For the country?
Yeah.
That's unusual for a North American to hear, because we're not really ever embarrassed for our countries.
No, if we are, then we're very outspoken about it. You know, like, I'm embarrassed that our country did this.
Yes.
You know,
lip service usually.
yeah, but no, here they really want to move Korea to being a first world country, not
As quickly as possible.
Exactly, not a first world country with traces of a third world country.
Right.
Because
That's why a lot of foreigners like it.
I read an excellent essay online a while ago that you might be able to find. It was called like 300 years of modernization in 30 years in Korea. You know, something like that.
That's the acceleration of the whole process.
Exactly.
Now, tell me a little bit about how did you get to Korea? When did you get to Korea?
All right. I first came here in 1996 as a 16-year-old. My uncle was an English teacher living in Yeosu. It's actually technically Yeocheon, which later was absorbed into Yeosu, which is now the bigger city where the 2012 Yeosu Expo happened. I went back there recently, and they demolished half of Yeosu to make the Yeosu Expo.
Just knocked it down.
Yeah. They preserved one giant silo. They turned it into a place to go up and like see everything. But yeah, like there was a kind of a seaside village that was totally knocked down to make this expo.
What was it? What's the difference between the Korea you first saw and the one you live in today?
The Korea I first saw was definitely a developing country. And when I first came here, I didn't know if I could expect, people living in grass huts or high-rises.
Yeah, what are you going to see? Who knows?
It was honestly both. But the grass huts are looking better and better all the time.
In comparison to the skyscraper projects.
Yeah. But, the last time I went back to home, everybody was curious about Korea. I was like, yeah, I was in Korea. And they were like, oh, wow, like, do you listen to any of this K-pop? I was like, no.
They didn't say this in the 90s, did they?
No. There was K-pop in the 90s, but it sucked really bad. But yeah.
That little international reach.
Yeah. Ever since Psy, people know a lot more about Korea. Back in the day, it was like, oh, Korea, isn't that the place with that dictator?
No,
it's like...
North or South? Which one were you in?
Exactly. Yeah, I've had a lot of jokes at people's expenses for that.
Well, the less someone knows about Korea, the more likely they are to ask you North or South, the old North or South question.
Yeah.
But on the tour you took me on today, me and many others, some of those buildings we saw, if you isolated them, showed me just a picture of them and said that's in North Korea, I would believe you. So what is the story with buildings like that here? Ones that are in such an advanced state of decrepitude, they're not third world, they're not new skyscrapers. What are these?
I actually, I played an April Fool's Day joke a few years ago where I took some of my pictures of some of those decrepit buildings and I claimed that I had accidentally wandered into North Korea. I claimed that I found a tunnel up close to the border and I walked through and I ended up near Kaesong, and the North Koreans, they picked me up and they were actually very nice to me and they were like, well, we got to send you back, but you can see some of Kaesong for the day.
And some friends believed you, I'm sure.
And I actually, this was targeted at people outside, like back home, but I actually took pictures of newish high-rise complexes in Suwon that were built in the 90s that looked, clean and everything, but looked all identical. Right. No originality or creativity.
3-digit numbers to mark them off.
This is why North Korea is in such a bad state, because this architecture is killing, them. Not literally, but, killing creativity.
Sure.
And everybody believed it because it fit that bullshit narrative,
Sure.
Yeah. It's so easy to make up some garbage story about North Korea and have people believe it. Honestly, I went to Pyongyang and Kaesong, and the architecture up there, it's actually quite better than Seoul.
Better?
Yeah.
In Pyongyang?
Oh, yeah.
Because you say Pyongyang, we think of the incomplete until recently Ryugyong Hotel, we think of the buildings that the water doesn't reach the top floor because of the plumbing problems.
Yeah.
How is it better?
There is less uniformity in the buildings, and if you look past the fact that there is much less advertising, the buildings actually are more colorful than here. And some of the buildings are just magnificent. The architecture is just monumental. I think that's the actual term.
It must be your dream to get to some of the hidden spaces of Pyongyang, because you don't get to leave your minders, do you, on that tour?
No. I actually, I went up in 2010 for the summer, and I really did want to visit the Ryugyong Hotel. I contacted Orascom, the Egyptian company that was kind of refitting the top of it to make it into a cell phone tower. Right. And so they were like, yeah, we'll forward you to this guy and this guy. And so I went on the tour. Never got a chance. And then I after the tour, I got back to China, got online, and I had an email waiting for me saying, yeah, the CEO is in Pyongyang. He wants to know when you'll be there so you can meet up. But after that, actually, some of the people who run Koryo tours, Simon, he actually managed to go with permission into the Yukjang Hotel, and he has pictures of the lobby. So, yeah, I really wanted to be the first to get those pictures, but it's interesting to see. They keep saying it'll be finished soon, so someday I'd like to go back there and stay there.
So why in Seoul are there buildings that you can say these are in North Korea and have people believe you? Why are there buildings we think of as in a North Korean state of disrepair or conformity or what have you in Seoul, in the south?
Yeah. Well, first of all, North Korea definitely has more creativity and more magnificence to their buildings. But yeah, they are known to be, more decrepit looking. And that does happen here. Honestly, when North Korean reporters come here, they always try to go to the poorest areas to try to photograph, like the Dongdaemun, as I mentioned before, to show the poverty in South Korea.
Show how bad off the Southerners are.
And the idea that there's that extreme type of poverty in South Korea goes against the narrative of what Korea is. When we worked in the government, we like to say Korea it was the first country to go from an aid recipient to an aid donor. And actually, from what I understand, in order to become an aid donor, they actually stopped some local charities. Yeah, just to be like, we're perfect. We don't have to worry about this. I shouldn't say don't quote me on that, but I can't think of a direct example. But yeah, there is an imperative to support this narrative that portrays Korea as a seamless country with no depths. And I find the greatest thing about Korea is its depth and its struggle to modernize and its struggle to democratize.
It's something you see clearly when you're actually going into these disputed spaces, yes?
Yeah, that's the thing. Like, I see, history in action when I go to these places. And I think this tour today, you were able to see that too, probably. Yeah. It's a complex process that disrupts the lives of millions of people. Some maybe just inconveniences, but some really, really screws up their lives,
So how soon after you came to Korea did you become aware this was all going on in Seoul?
Actually, my very first year in Korea, I was talking on MSN Messenger with a lot of friends back home.
As you did in those days?
Yeah, back then. I was talking with one guy in my hometown who was starting to get into urban exploring there. And in my hometown, Edmonton, it's the police are always heavily patrolling it. If you talk about it online, they'll find you and they'll be waiting for you. So, yeah, not a big deal, But in 2005, this was the year after I got here, I realized that Korea has these abandoned neighborhoods. So I just went to one, looked around, took pictures, had an okay day.
Where did you go?
It was near Gongdok Station, and now it's a high-rise complex called Brownstone, which is one of the main names.
Do they always become high-rise complexes? Yes. Is that the reason a neighborhood gets abandoned, because it should be a high-rise in the government? Oh, really? Oh, wow.
Always. If you look at any high-rise complex in this city, almost all of them were built on the ruins of smaller neighborhoods. And we should clarify that, it is good that things are updated. But the problem is, they displace poorer communities in favor of upper middle class and rich people.
So how could they do it better?
How could they do it better? Honestly, they just need to improve laws for evictees, which they always try to do, but people are always getting screwed over. But I would like to see, rather than focus on, homes for yuppies, nuclear family type people, which are becoming very rare in Korea, they need to focus on affordable housing so that single people can live in convenient places.
They do that in Canada, don't they? In your homeland, in Vancouver, I see a lot of buildings that are X% social housing, as they say. Yeah. That's not in effect here in Seoul?
Not really. In front of Yongsan Station, they're developing a new project. It's going to be called an office tel, which basically...
I've heard that word here and there.
It's like office and hotel.
It's not quite English.
Yeah, you can use it as an office or you can live there, which is not something you can do in Canada. So that would be that's a good step, I think. Honestly, it'd be nice if they didn't have to ruin a lot of lives, but in that case, they actually demolished a red light district. So, yeah.
How did you discover the Korean punk scene?
The Korean punk scene, I actually researched it before I came here.
wanted to make sure there was a punk scene before you came to this
It
country.
was important, yeah.
Why was it essential?
Well, it's what I socialized with back home, and when I came here, I got into the punk scene, and suddenly I had like 50 Korean friends who were very close to me, despite the fact we couldn't communicate very well.
You had that language of punk, essentially.
Yeah, exactly. I don't consider myself to be that similar with people from my country. I don't get along with most random Canadians. But yeah, back home, people I hung out with were punks, and I came here and I discovered the same thing existed here too.
So what's the scene like? What was it like? What did you find when you searched for the Korean punk scene when you got here? What did you find?
It was very small and it didn't have a very big online presence. I found them in my first month here, and I show up at shows with my camera, so they got to know me very quickly.
Centered where? Where was the punk scene in those days?
Right outside Hongik University, in an area we just call Hongdae in general. That's pretty well like the main place where you'll find like at least 90% of all, youth culture, counter.
Then and now.
Then and now, yeah. But back then it was much different. There were very few foreigners who knew about it. So my very first show, there was me and there was one other American guy, and everybody else was Korean. But back then they were all in bands, so I was like one of the few actual paying members.
It seems like you watch Korean movies, even today, they're often made in the spirit of protest against or criticism of Korean society.
Yeah.
I would imagine Korean punk music could flourish for the same reason.
No, it does not flourish here. First of all, a lot of those movies that you mention, they only become popular if they find a foreign audience. And then once that happens, Koreans are like, oh, foreigners like this movie, we should go and support the movie. More or less, anyway. Like Psy, with Gangnam Style.
Oh, they like it? Okay, then.
Exactly. Psy was not really well liked until suddenly he went viral in America. And the first reaction was, oh, why is this a song? Like, I worked for the Korean government at the time, and everybody was saying, why Psy? Why not Girls' Generation? We actually have put a lot of money into trying to make them big in America, and it's gone nowhere.
But they're so perfect. Look at how we perfected them.
So why is this like overweight guy who's kind of making Korea look kind of weird?
Which is why I love that. I mean, I'm not a huge Psy fan, but I love that he was the one to make it.
Yeah, I don't care for his music at all, but I respect him as an artist. Less so these days, but after his video caught on. The Korean government actually started looking more closely at indie bands and saying, like, maybe bands that we don't meddle in from, like a young age.
From day one.
Yeah, before day one.
Yes.
A lot of K-pop stars are gestating for their entire teenage years. Maybe the bands that are just doing it on their own are where we should be looking for the next Psy, let's say.
So the bands of Hongdae, for example.
Yeah, exactly. So a lot of my friends' bands have had a lot of chances to travel overseas lately. It's increasing a lot, and it's really amazing. They actually go overseas and they know what to do. They just go there and it's like, hey, it's the same as back home, just different language. And people, they make connections, which is something that K-pop struggles to do.
How similar or different is Korean punk to the punk we know in North America?
It is, for the most part, I don't know. I can't speak for America. I have a lot of American friends, and the way they describe the scene sounds very different from Canada. In Canada, punk is a refuge for people who don't get along with the rest of society. In America, it seems like there's a lot more of a, violent element to it. A lot more, big tough guys who run the thing. But, yeah, where I come from, it's not so much. You can be a skinny nerd and, have a lot of friends in the punk scene. Korea is the same as that. The one difference I would say is that Korean bands have a much higher standard of quality, so that they'll practice for months and months and months.
They're better musicians, which is not saying much, than American punk rockers.
Yeah. So a lot of my Korean friends who move to America are or Canada, I should say, are there's nobody good enough to join my band here. So they get to a really good level before they even do their.
It's not about that.
Yeah, exactly. I actually try to tell them to loosen up and start earlier, but they don't.
Now, how did a guy who is into the illegal exploration of abandoned places and punk music get to work for the Korean government?
That was a complete fluke, and it surprised everybody, including myself. I was desperate for a job. I applied. They called me back. The job actually said you had to have an MA or better, or it was required or recommended. I came in and I was there was like five of us came in to interview and take an editing test, and I'm assuming everybody else there had an MA or something. So they brought us in for an hour-long hour-long editing and writing test, where we had to edit this big long piece about Korean history and then write 500 words on how I would promote Korea.
Sure.
And
what'd you say?
Basically, I edited the thing, and then I said I would promote a wider range of music, and I forget the other things that I said.
Which is still necessary.
Yeah. But I wrote exactly 500 words, and I finished exactly at 60 minutes, and all the other candidates said, I need more time, and they ended up taking another 30 minutes.
Only you finished on time.
Yeah. So that was about it. And while I worked there, I had to keep all my activities with the Korean... Well, with urban exploration, I kept it pretty quiet. I didn't tell them about my website, Daehanmindecline, because the name itself sounds negative about Korea. It's not intended to be. It just, it's like a punk thing.
Yeah, it makes me think of the Penelope Spheris documentaries, The Decline of Western Civilization, about Los Angeles' punk scene.
It literally used to be hosted on a website called indecline.net. So it's like Daehanmindecline plus Indecline. So I never intended there to be anything negative about Korea in there. It's like, decline of Western civilization at worst. It started as photography about the punk scene, and then I did my urban exploration thing, and then I just thought, I'll just put it all together. I have a lot of politically radical Korean friends, so it just made sense to keep everything together eventually.
What are the positions held by a politically radical Korean?
There actually are Koreans who are into the urban renewal protest thing.
They just don't want to see high-rises displacing more poor neighborhoods.
Yeah, exactly. The lead singer of Galaxy Express, which is now a pretty big band, back in the day, he was involved in some pretty serious protests in Gwangmyeong, where they were redeveloping a neighborhood, and he's probably done a lot more. In Hongdae, right by Hongik University Station, there was a little triangle of buildings that were being redeveloped. I forget for what reason now. And after there was a noodle shop there called Duriban, and after they were violently assaulted one Christmas day, they decided to come back and try to do what happened in Yongsan, essentially. They wanted to, fortify themselves and have a sit-in. They basically had a 3-story building right on the edge of Hongdae. There was, the noodle shop didn't really exist in that way anymore. It was just the owners there. But the other tenants of the building left. And so the second floor became, squats where people could sleep. The third floor became, a hall where you could have concerts. And I organized one concert there. And we had a movie screening there and stuff like that. And on May 1st, Worldwide Labor Day, they started having a festival there. It was called the 51 Plus Festival. Partly the name was from May 1st, but also because they had 51 bands.
I see.
So at that point, they just took this area through the owners of this one business, and they developed it into this very politically left-wing, with a lot of anarchists, place where artists could come. They could bands could practice for a very low price there. We could put on concerts there for a very, very low price, which was very rare in Hongdae. So it became a really interesting cultural space, and that's happened many times thanks to that since then. Fortunately, not always as radical, but it can be a very radical thing. I know that the development company was spying on us while we were at shows.
How'd you find out?
Through interviews with some of the more seriously involved people. But actually, I put on one concert there, and one of my Korean friends, after that, was arrested for violating the national security law. He was making tweets, he was reposting North Korean propaganda on Twitter and joking about it. So they arrested him and put him in jail for 2 months. And they had a big dossier on him, and one of the things they said was, you were organizing events at Duriban. So yeah, he did that and I did that. And so, but I worked for the government and he got arrested by the
You
government.
didn't go to jail.
No, I never did.
Oh my.
Yeah.
Now I've heard from expats here that the underground culture in Seoul it can be a bit hard to come by. I mean, is it for this reason that there's so much enforcement about so much enforcement of laws that sort of chafe against it?
Yeah, I mean, the current president, Park Geun-hye, one of her big ideas is she wants to support happiness of the people. But, honestly...
That sounds very ominous.
It does, yeah. She doesn't really know what happiness is. Like, she just thinks happiness is something that you can give people, like a pill, which I guess you can now. But she's really, really strict with artists. Like, during her election campaign, one artist painted a picture of her giving birth to... And they didn't show any genitals, thankfully.
Sure.
But yeah, giving birth to a baby that looked suspiciously like her father, Park Jung-hee. Korea's most famous dictator, South Korea's most famous dictator,
Who ordered a lot of development to happen.
Oh yeah. And some people consider him a savior of Korea. Some people were locked up by him unrightfully. So I see him as a dictator who helped turn Korea from a third world country into a first world country, and made a lot of enemies on the way. And yeah, so now his daughter is president. But yeah, that guy was harassed. I don't know what happened to him, but Park Geun-hye compared him to Nazism. She's like,
that artist,
art or something. I guess Hitler was an artist.
Sure, of a sort.
It's like, yeah, so this government is like being picked on by an artist, so the artist is a Nazi, right?
Does the punk scene is the punk scene sort of doomed to struggle because of things like this?
I think so. I think the punk scene has to exist in this kind of doomed place, because if it gets bigger, it's going to lose what makes it great. One of the really interesting things about Korea is the word Han. I don't know. Have you ever run across that word before?
Oh, of course.
It's a word that means basically being butthurt about suffering from things you can't control. It can refer to Korea's suffering under the Japanese occupation, or what happened in the Korean War, or America's strong military presence here. Actually, when I worked for the government, I discovered that they want to eradicate the word Han. They want to replace it with the word Hung, which comes from Hungyapda, which means like a sense of joy.
Right, heard that one too.
Yeah, but they literally are using Hung to replace Han.
Is that possible? Can they just order that?
I don't know yet. I've been surprised how obedient Korean people can be about changes like this from the government. Like changing the side of the street you walk on, or walking on escalators. Those behaviors have been changed across the board in the time I've been here. But yeah, Han is a very, very fundamental influence of a lot of Korean music. Punk bands, a lot of other bands, the reggae bands, stuff like that,
Even reggae expresses Han.
There was an amazing reggae band a few years ago called I Jangdan. It was like a dub reggae group, and the lead singer was a pansori singer. And I played this music to one of my Korean coworkers once in 2009 maybe, and he just said this is Han.
This is it.
Yeah,
there it is,
exactly.
Expressed.
Yeah, exactly. It's so fundamental, but it's something that they don't like getting out. So in order to really succeed past a certain level, you have to be Hung, not Han. Yeah.
Switch over.
They might have to. Some bands kind of have made the transition well. I mean, if you're gonna get big, they'll support you either way, like Psy. But sometimes they there's a band called CN Blue that was basically manufactured like a K-pop band, as far as I can tell. That plays state-approved rock music.
State-approved rock music. This is you think of Soviet Russia, don't you?
I wish. But yeah, they've actually they had some legal trouble because they were caught not only covering one of Korea's greatest punk bands, Crying Nut, they actually performed a concert that was recorded for DVDs that they sold, where they took a Crying Nut track and played it and played air guitar to it. So they might cover the band in their shows, but in this, they were literally pretending to play a Crying Nut song with the actual Crying Nut recording. And Crying Nut successfully sued them and then said a comment yeah, if you do this, then if you steal our intellectual property, yeah, there are consequences. And then CN Blue countersued them for slander because it was determined that the management was at fault, not the band. It's like, in that kind of band, the management is the band, you know?
Right. Now, exploring the newest abandoned places in Korea that you find, what does it tell you about the state of Seoul today, or of Korea today, indeed?
Actually, a little over 5 years ago, we elected a new mayor called Park Won-soon. And he was came out of nowhere, let's say came out of left field candidate, because he was the left-wing candidate. He was not affiliated with any political parties. And one of the things that he said was he didn't want to have, any big grand architectural projects, like the mayor before him, Oh Se-hoon, was responsible for the devastation of, Yongsan, basically. Oh Se-hoon was also the guy who created Dongdaemun Design Plaza, which recently opened.
What you've written about.
Yeah, and with Park Won-soon as mayor when it opened, he was like, this is an ugly building, but, well, we've got it, so we got to make the best of it. And before Oh Se-hoon, we had Mayor Lee Myung-bak, and he created...
not to be president.
Yeah, at that time he would later become president during... Yeah. But while he was mayor, he restored Cheonggyecheon, the stream, and reopened it as the stream.
It was once an elevated highway, then now a stream. We were walking on it the other day. It was pretty pleasant, but also not necessarily pleasant to know how it was created, right?
And the thing was, Lee Myung-bak used to be the CEO of Hyundai. Hyundai was the company that originally buried the stream in the first place. So Lee Myung-bak was basically repairing the damage of Hyundai. So these two previous mayors were, doing these vanity projects to try to become president. It worked for Lee Myung-bak. It totally failed for Oh Se-hoon. Park Won-soon is against those sorts of things.
Just in principle, doesn't like those.
Yeah, he just said, any project that is not too far enough along that we can stop, we're going to stop. And honestly,
why is he against them?
Because they're stupid. They're a waste of taxpayer money.
Sure.
Yeah.
He's a politician too, so.
He just got reelected, and I'm very proud to say it was my first time voting for mayor as a permanent resident. His job makes my job harder. It's harder to find abandonments, but that's a compliment.
So this Dongdaemun Design Plaza, I'm interested in seeing it. I'm not necessarily a fan of it to look at it, but what is the significance of this building?
Dongdaemun Design Plaza basically was a very expensive project built by Oh Se-hoon in Dongdaemun, which is, well, when I say Dongdaemun, it's not in Dongdaemun-gu, but right inside the original gate of the city. It's a very famous fashion market. There are a lot of other really cool markets around there. I love that area so much. But there used to be two stadiums there, and they were historic buildings, and Oh Se-hoon, I don't think I want to tell the whole story. Yeah, but...
Whatever version you want to tell.
Basically, I mentioned Lee Myung-bak created modern Cheonggyecheon, but to do that, he had to evict a lot of market people, and he let them move to the Dongdaemun stadiums, and he said, yeah, you can stay here as long as you want. We'll turn this into a world-class flea market. Didn't happen. He left office, and his successor from the same political party said, I made no such promise, and he redeveloped the stadiums and turned those people out on their asses. Actually, at the end, when the last of the two stadiums was demolished, there were 75 vendors still there doing a sit-in, and they were attacked by 500 hired goons. 500? Yeah, came in and beat the hell out of them. Early morning. I forget the date right now. But yeah, that was 2008, I think. And at that time, Seoul had been picked to be World Design Capital of 2010, I think. Which means what? It was some weird company that they probably paid a lot of money to be named World Design Capital. Honestly, yeah, Pyongyang would be a better choice. But yeah, so this Dongdaemun Design Plaza went through many names, and they wanted to have it finished in time for 2010. As the centerpiece of this. By 2010, they were closer to the start than the end of the project. And I actually have pictures of the evicted vendors setting up shop out front, which was kind of a protest / flea market. And in the background, you can see the fences with these signs declaring world design capital and all that. I was like, this is the biggest insult. I actually, at that time too, I went to Yongsan, and that building I talked about, Namildang, where the Yongsan disaster happened. While it was sitting there as a burned out husk, they put up World Design Capital flags right in front of the thing. So I have a picture showing World Design Capital, and in the background you see this burned out building where 6 people died for World Design Capital, you know? Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Now, you mentioned how Korean people can mistake the name of your site, Daehanmindecline, for an accusation of Korea, Daehanminduk in decline. Do you see any kind of decline, or the opposite? Do you see it getting better, or what do you see in that sense?
Korea, everything about Korea has improved in the time I've been here. The site is literally because it used to be hosted on Indecline, and I thought it was cute, Daehanmin, and then Indecline, kind of, I forget what that's called. I actually, I did a photo exhibition of my North Korea pictures called Joseon Minju Dui Inmin Decline, which is the name of North Korea combined with that. No real message involved in that. I think most people would look at what I do and be like, yeah, this guy really loves Korea, too much.
Yeah. I don't think it's in decline.
Yeah. But I love certain aspects of Korea that are not really publicly loved, like the punk scene. I love a lot of the buildings that are being destroyed. I live in Bukchon Hanok Village now, which is kind of the place where they're trying to preserve Hanoks, supposedly, traditional Korean houses, so that if they preserve them here, they can destroy them everywhere else. But honestly, they are
an excuse. Yeah, right.
They are still always chipping away at the Hanok, the traditional Korean architecture in Bukchon even.
I hear that Hanok have become kind of trendy. They used to be very cheap to buy because they might get demolished. Yeah. Now you pay a premium for them because people go in and renovate. Is that true?
Yeah, actually, it's become my neighborhood is very, very gentrified right now. But there's still a lot more to it that a lot of people don't see. Like, a lot of the Hanoks actually are just, not being used by anybody. They're just, somebody owns the land. And every once in a while, one of them gets knocked down. Several months ago, I looked out my window, and I saw, they were demolishing a Hanok right across the alley from me.
In front of your eyes?
In front of my eyes, yeah. Thanks to my cat for perching up there, and I went to look. She saw it before me. And so I started going back and taking pictures whenever I could to show the status of how they preserve a Hanok. Step 1, demolish it. Step 2, build an entirely new, nicer Hanok on the same spot. That's not preservation.
You can't have the world seeing an old Hanok. That's old, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's old and it's gross. And it's from a dirtier Korea that no longer exists in our, imagined ideal version of Korea.
Can Korea shake that idea of old equals bad?
Japan did very successfully. I don't know why Japan revels in old and decay. In Japan, the word haikyo means abandoned place. It's also used as the Japanese word for urban exploring there. In Korea, the equivalent with the Hanja characters would be peha. And that's not a pretty word in Korea at all. But yeah, somehow Japanese people just see something deep in the aesthetic and the just the idea of urban decay. They
like the imperfection.
Yeah, exactly. And Koreans have a vested interest in being we're rising straight up with no bumps on the way.
Full speed ahead. What gives you hope for the future of Korea then? What are good signs other than, the mayor that doesn't like the giant white elephant projects? What do you see and you're like, well, I'm going to stick it out here?
Yeah. That's a tough question. One of the interesting things that I've seen is in a lot of parts of Seoul, they're currently trying to they're going to create new Hanok villages. Up in Eunpyeong-gu, there's Eunpyeong Hanok Village. There's one somewhere in Seongbuk, I forget where.
All new built Hanok.
Yeah. It's not preservation. There weren't Hanoks there before, at least not previously from whatever they demolished. They're just going to build new Hanok villages with no historical background. They're just going to try to use these ancient techniques to build nice places. Honestly, yeah, I think that's probably the best we can hope for. The spirit is there, if not the historical relevance. So, yeah, that's good.
Have you ever seen a punk show in a Hanok?
I've seen punk shows in front of Hanoks in the area where Duriban was, but actually I did see a funk, not with an F, not a P, a funk show in Makalijiv in a Hanok in Insadong. And it was funny because that night I was either going to go to a big hardcore festival or this one little like funk band playing. A hardcore festival went all according to schedule. Everybody had a great time. The funk show, there was a brawl, a bar clearing brawl.
Funk brawl in Korea.
And the great thing was the funk band. They were called Funk Afrik Busta. The lead keyboardist, he's the lead of the band. It's called Lim Ji Hoon. And yeah, they kept playing during the whole brawl. It was so amazing.
Never stopped.
Didn't miss a beat.
Now, I want to know, if somebody comes to Korea looking for underground culture, whether it's literally underground, abandoned places, or whether it's underground music, or anything below the mainstream, far below, what do you recommend they do? How do you recommend they think about Korea, approach Seoul? Maybe they shouldn't be in Seoul. I don't know. What do you tell them?
First of all, there are existing communities that you can find online for music. For everything else, I highly recommend just come here and use your unfamiliarity as a tool.
How did you do that?
I came here and I saw things differently because they were new. I've been here 10 years now and I don't see them that way anymore. But yeah, when I was new here, I'd just look at something and be like, wow, and that led me down some very interesting paths. And that's really all I did. Over the years, it developed into a very specific tool where, I could sniff out an interesting area from 2 blocks away, whipping by on my scooter or something.
The sense develops.
Yeah. But if you are interested in the music scene, just Google it. Google Korea punk, if that's your thing. You'll find something. Google Korea hip hop, you'll find stuff. There are specific groups for Korean heavy metal, for Korean punk and hardcore, and for Korean reggae that you can find on Facebook that are very closely watched by communities of people. You can find the website Do Indie or Korea Gig Guide. Those are the two main ones, I would say, for show listings where you can find out what's happening. Korean punk and Korea Gig Guide is all in English, which can be a detriment if you need to have Korean words for reference sometimes. Do Indie is bilingual. They'll have a Korean article and then an English article. Between the two of them and between many other sites, you can find out what's happening next weekend, and you can connect with very open-minded Korean people there. And I recommend everybody does that.
And finally, do you find newer arrivals in Korea, or even indeed Koreans themselves who are quite young, introducing you to new underground stuff?
Honestly, there's so much happening that there are corners of the music scene I'm not aware of that somebody might unearth, and then I'll meet them there. I'll meet them somewhere and discover that. I went. There's a new venue in Chungmudo, in somebody's photo studio. I went to a show there, and there were all these foreigners there who were clearly closely part of this scene that I'd never seen before. There's a lot of people coming through. There's a lot to discover. I'm not the king of it all. I don't know everything that's happening. People are always surprising me. With abandoned buildings in Korea, I like to keep on top of everything that's going on. So I'm very active through the internet. I do active searches, in Korean language and Flickr and foreigner blogs and stuff.
Everything you can find.
Exactly, yeah. Because probably some random person who's been here a week might go to the right place and see something amazing, and I might find them. But I'd find them through that before I'd find that actual place. There's so much to see in Korea. It's amazing. It's such a small place that it's feasible to do it all in a short trip. I got to keep in contact with people so that I can know what's happening,
I've been speaking here in the bar beside the railroad tracks, one of the bars beside the railroad tracks, in Seoul, Korea, with Jon Dunbar, editor of Broken Korea, the longest-running English-language punk Korean fanzine. He's also an urban explorer and the author of the website Daehanmindecline.com. Jon, thanks so much for taking the time.
Thank you for interviewing me. Thank you for taking the interest.
No, but we've been drinking. This has been
a lot of alcohol.
This has been Notebook on Cities and Culture. I've been Colin Marshall. You can keep up with the cultural creators, internationalists, and observers of the urban scene on the show at colinmarshall.org. Thanks. And special thanks to all the backers of Notebook on Cities and Culture's Korea tour on Kickstarter. Adam Hartzell, Aidan Nullman, Alfred Lee, Andy Cooney, Angus Gordon, Bala Chenupati, Cam Smith, Chin Music Press, Dan Caraselli, Danny, Deborah Smith, Emmett Farragher, Umberto Grant, Ian Plosker, Ismail Kennedy, Jackie Gast, Jay Chang, Jeffrey Davis, James DeVito, Jonathan Filbert, Josh Paget, Kimberly Hahn, Manvir, Mark Hines, Matthew Workman, Maureen Kincaid Speller, Monica Eck, Michael Fransky, MJ Pritchett, Patrick O'Flaherty, Patrick Park, Piers Rippey, Robert Salzberg, Samuel Hansen, Sean Brown, Themistocles Crucis, Thomas Unterberger, Timothy Dobbs, and Wayne Wright.